Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Lisa Fernandez. I'm the Associate Director at the Yale Center for Environmental Communication. And this talk is sponsored by the Yale Center for Environmental Communication. We're very happy to have you here. Thank you so much for joining. Right off the top, I just want to give a land acknowledgement. I'm speaking to you from land originally of the Quinnipiac Nation and stewarded by them for many generations. And we acknowledge that Indigenous peoples and nations have stewarded through generations the lands and waterways of what is now the state of Connecticut and the city of New Haven. Based at Yale University School of the Environment, this center focuses on 4 areas. First, we conduct research on the psychological, cultural, and political factors that influence environmental attitudes and behavior. Second, we teach students and train working professionals on strategic environmental communication. Third, we convene a global network of climate communication scholars and practitioners. And finally, we inform and engage the public through environmental journalism, including Yale Climate Connections, a climate-focused news service that engages many thousands of people every day and includes a short daily radio story that airs on more than 680 stations nationwide. Just to go over a couple of logistics with you all, the chat is closed. Please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen and be aware that you only see the question that you asked. We have folks on the panel and doing logistics that will be monitoring the questions, so be assured that your question will be seen. Thanks. Now it is my very special honor and privilege to introduce the moderator. This is Dr. Willie James Jennings, who's a professor at the Yale Divinity School. Dr. Jennings is an ordained Baptist minister and has served as interim pastor for several North Carolina churches. He is in high demand as a speaker and is widely recognized as a major figure in theological education across North America. A Calvin College graduate, Jennings received his MDiv from Fuller Theological Seminary and his PhD in religion and ethics from Duke. Writing in the areas of liberation theologies, cultural identities, and anthropology, Jennings has authored more than 40 scholarly essays and nearly 24 reviews, as well as essays on academic administration and blog posts for religion dispatches. Now, I'd like to turn it over to Professor Jennings. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lisa. It is a joy to be with you, and I'm very excited to be a part of this wonderful conversation with these stellar panelists. Allow me to introduce our panelists for today so that we can enter into our conversation. Our first panelist is the Reverend Kyle Meyaard-Schaap. Reverend Schaap serves as the Vice President for the Evangelical Environmental Network. Previously, he was the national organizer and spokesperson for Young Evangelicals for Climate Action. Kyle has been named to the Midwest Energy Group's 40 Under 40 and the American Conservation Coalition's 30 Under 30 cohorts for his work on climate change education and advocacy. Most recently, he was named a Yale Public Voices on the Climate Crisis Fellow for 2020. Welcome, Kyle. So glad to have you here. We also have the Reverend Ambrose Carroll. The Reverend Dr. Ambrose Carroll Sr. is the senior pastor at the Church by the Side of the Road in Berkeley, California, and is one of the nation's premier practical theologians. He is also the CEO of Green the Church, the largest repository and catalyst for environmental and sustainability practices of the Black church worldwide. And we have Gabby Trejo. Gabby Trejo is the executive director of the Sacramento ACT, which stands for Area Congregations Together, a faith-based organization that develops people through the power of storytelling and relationships to identify community issues and solutions. She began at Sacramento ACT as an organizer in 2013. She is motivated to create change owing to her experiences growing up in California around the time of Proposition 187, an anti-immigration proposition now repealed. We welcome you to this panel discussion. We look forward to hearing from you. We begin with Kyle. So Kyle, please begin us.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jennings. It's an honor to be a part of this discussion. I'm excited to share a little bit about the work of the Evangelical Environmental Network in educating, organizing, and mobilizing evangelical Christians around the U.S., around creation care generally, and climate change more broadly. So I want to speak about two main topics today: why evangelicals and how evangelicals. The first, why evangelicals, is easy because it's faithful. We believe doing this work is simply part of what it means to follow Jesus in the 21st century. That obedience to the Creator who made a good world and calls us to love it too means taking pollution and climate change seriously. And we're trying to invite other evangelicals to understand creation care and climate action as a fundamental act of obedience as well. But it also can't be denied that evangelical Christians are a powerful political constituency in the United States. That influence has waned a little bit in recent years, but remains potent. And if we could reach just a fraction of the evangelical community on the issue of climate change so that it becomes a primary motivating issue for them, we could transform climate change politics in America. And the fourth reason why is because of the generation gap. Younger evangelicals do not have much of the baggage or the hangups that a lot of their parents and grandparents have around the issue of climate change, and they are desperate for the church to act and to be given tools to act themselves. And this is important for two reasons. One, because these are the leaders of religious and political and cultural institutions of the future. And if they can be empowered now to cultivate a passion for climate action and the tools to do it, they can take that into the institutions that they will be leading in the future. But even right now, they are powerful moral messengers that have the power to move leaders in those positions of power right now for the better. Here are just a couple of examples of studies showing this age gap, this generation gap, of how younger evangelicals and even younger Republicans understand climate change and environmental issues as crucial and necessary for us to take action on compared to older evangelical generations. So how do we do this? I want to talk about three primary principles or strategies that we use when we do our education, organizing, and mobilizing. I doubt this will be earth-shattering for a lot of us. I think we've all heard these principles generally, but I hope to show in some case studies in a minute how it looks a little different for our community when we do this. So the first thing we try to do is build on shared values, existing values that already motivate evangelicals. We want to recognize and affirm their existing identities. We don't want to ask them to become anyone that they aren't. And finally, we want to communicate through trusted messengers. And as we do all of this, what we're trying to do is to create a permission structure. In other words, we want to make it okay for evangelicals to enter into this conversation. Unfortunately, a lot of evangelicals don't feel permission for lots of reasons we don't have time to talk about today, but don't necessarily feel permission to make this issue their own. So we want to give them that permission. And a primary way we do that is we create a positive social norm for action. We get a lot of other evangelicals taking action and showing them what it can look like for them to do this work too. So first, how do we build on shared values? There are a couple of values that are really important in the evangelical community. The first is the authority of Scripture. Scripture is the only rule of life and faith for evangelicals. And so we drench all of our work in Scripture. We try to depoliticize and re-biblicize the issue of climate change as much as we can. So we take them to Genesis 1 and 2, the creation narratives. We take them to Leviticus, where it tells us the land is the Lord's and we are but tenants. We go through Job and the Psalms that witness to God's passionate, intimate love for creation. And we go to the New Testament and we look at the incarnation and we challenge people in our community to consider what it might mean about what God thinks of God's creation, that God took on the stuff of creation himself in a body and has it even now in heaven in his resurrected form. We look at Ephesians and Colossians where it says that Christ is reconciling all things to himself, maybe not just human souls, but maybe actually all things. And in Revelation, where we know that the ultimate hope of the Christian faith is not disembodied souls being sucked up into heaven, but the opposite. We don't go to God, God comes to us, and God unites heaven and earth once and for all in perfect justice, fulfillment, and delight, free from the curse of sin, in a renewed heaven and a renewed earth. Another value that's important to our community is the sanctity of life. I think we see this most clearly in the issue of abortion, but we know that life issues extend beyond abortion, and we challenge evangelicals to recognize that. And we say, if we are going to have a consistent ethic of human life, we need to look at what pollution and climate change is doing to people's lives right now. We help them understand that the burning of fossil fuels emits more than just greenhouse gases, but other toxic byproducts like mercury, lead, selenium, benzene, all of which are harmful to human health. They cross the placental barrier and impede fetal development, leading to low birth weights and stillbirths. They cause asthma in young kids. They harm the elderly, and they disproportionately impact Black and brown communities who are already being marginalized and oppressed by systemic racism in America. The second thing we do is we recognize and we affirm who they are. Catherine Hayhoe, pictured here, is a good friend of our organization, and she does a great job communicating how everybody is already exactly who they need to be to care about climate change. We don't need to ask anybody to change who they are. If they are living, breathing, eating, loving on planet Earth, then they have every reason they need to care about climate change. Unfortunately, a lot of people in our community don't necessarily hear this from the broader climate movement. A lot of times they'll hear something that sounds a little bit like this. Here are all the reasons that you and your loved ones are wrong. Here are all the reasons we and others who are nothing like you are right. Here are all the ways that you need to radically change the life that you love if you want to be right like us. Doing so will alienate you from every person you know and love, but don't worry, because it's going to make you more like us, and the world will be more like we want it to be. It's a little exaggerated, it's a little on the nose, but I think it helps us understand how some of our mainstream climate messaging is heard by communities who aren't necessarily inside that mainstream. And so what we try to do is flip that script. When we communicate and mobilize our folks, we say, here are all the things that you care about and that make your community great. Here are all the people just like you who care about the things that you care about, who are also taking action to address climate change. And when you join them, you deepen your connections to these people, you deepen your commitments to your values, and the world becomes more like you want it to be. And finally, we try to communicate all of this through trusted messengers. For evangelicals, that means their peers, fellow church members, people they worship next to and sit next to in the pews. Their kids. Kids are powerful moral messengers, and that is true in the evangelical church as well. And research bears this out. A recent study in Nature in 2019 showed that kids foster climate change concern among their parents. The most statistically significant relationship, interestingly, being daughters of conservative fathers. The most statistically significant shift in climate change views happened among conservative dads hearing from their daughters about why climate change matters to them. And finally, their leaders, pastors, other people, other trusted voices. And that's why a lot of the work that we do is to educate and equip pastors and other leaders in congregations to deliver this message and talk this way about creation care and climate change. Finally, I just want to share a couple of case studies about what this looks like in practice and how we're actually mobilizing real people toward climate action around these principles. And the first is a campaign called Climate Vigil. We just launched it. We're in the middle of it. It's a campaign that envisions thousands, hopefully someday millions of Christians gathering together in their worshiping communities, organized around their congregations into prayer, song, and lament for the climate crisis. So this is built on the shared values of community and corporate worship. We know that evangelicals value the community of the church, of their congregation, and their worshiping life together, and we're leaning into that. We're affirming who they are as worshiping people and saying, look, you are worshiping people, so let's bring the climate crisis into our worship. Let's have candlelit vigils where we pray, sing, and lament and integrate this into our worshiping life together. And this campaign is not led by a national spokesperson or field organizer. This is led by church members. We have recruited and trained dozens of people in communities who are doing the work of promoting this to their congregations, of hosting these events themselves, so that they are the messengers that people are hearing this from. And finally, the last case study I want to share, in 2015, EEN's youth engagement ministry called Young Evangelicals for Climate Action hosted a letter writing campaign to the National Association of Evangelicals, the largest umbrella group of evangelicals in the country, who at that point did not have a position statement on climate change. These young people said, that's wrong, we need to change that. And they wrote hundreds of letters to the executive committee of the board that eventually was successful. And the NAE adopted a call to action on creation care. And it worked because it built on shared values. It built on the shared value of a positive witness for the church. The letters said, because we care about the church, we care about its witness. We want it to be a winsome, compelling, authentic witness to a watching world. And we think our silence on this is a detriment to our witness. And that was compelling to leaders who share that value. It affirmed those leaders' identities because it said, because of the heritage of faith that you passed down, you did a great job raising us in the church. We care about the church. You were great leaders in helping lead us into the church. Be good leaders again and make this decision, make the right decision. And this was coming from kids of the church, exactly the kind of messengers these leaders needed to hear from. That was all my time, probably a couple extra minutes. I apologize for that. Here's my contact info. If you want to get in touch, I would love to continue the conversation and looking forward to the rest of the conversation today. Thanks.
Thank you, Kyle. Appreciate that. Brother Ambrose, would you go next, please?
Sure. I would not sit in the scorner's seat nor hurl the cynic's ban, but let me live in my house by the side of the road and be a friend of man. Again, so very glad to be here with you all. Kyle, deeply enjoyed your presentation. Gabby, looking forward to yours. Moderator Jennings, thank you all so much for this time. Again, I am Ambrose Carroll. I'm the pastor of the church by the side of the road in Berkeley, and that is not the location, it is the name. And glad to be here with you. Also the founder of Green the Church, and I think this is excellent dialogue to talk about doing environmental work within faith communities, and definitely want to talk about the resistance that we felt attempting to do this work across what we call the quote unquote Black church, which is a multiplicity of things. The Black church is many things. And so to talk about the resistance and the surprises in that, I want to take 5 minutes. I'll take 5 Baptist minutes, if that's okay, which means it'll be about 6 or 8. And tell you a little bit about Green the Church itself. All right. Let's make this smaller. Green the Church is an organization that was founded in 2010. I was a Green for All Fellow with Van Jones. I was actually in Colorado, and Green for All's out of Oakland, which is my home. So came home to begin to learn about the intersection of the environmental movement and urban environments, urban and rural environments, and learned a lot. And there were people from all over the country, people of color primarily, learning about ecology, right? And learning about food, and learning about technology, and learning about climate change. But there were not a lot of people who were embracing Western religion, not a lot of pastors. And then a year later, I ran into Sally Bingham, who is the founder of Interfaith Power and Light, and really found my tribe and found people of faith from all faith communities coming together, working on these issues, but not a lot of people of color. And so we wanted to bridge the gap and make sure that we brought the Black church further into the conversation. There's not been a successful social movement without the tone and tenor of the Black church. And we really wanted to wake up the sleeping giant that is the Black church. This is Dr. Frank Richardson, who is the chairperson of something called the National Congress of Black Churches, that brings all of these voices together, the bishops, presidents of state conventions, so on and so forth, individuals who are the heads of the Black caucus in white denominations, so that we could all begin to talk. We have 3 pillars: amplifying green theology, promoting sustainable practices, and building power for political and economic change. So we start with theology. And I think one of the surprises for me doing this work is how important theology is, like what people actually believe. I think is part and parcel of resistance that comes into play. And so we do things at Green the Church. We assemble and begin to talk to theologians. This is a webinar that we had with presidents of some of our historically Black theological institutions, ITC, Virginia Union, Reverend Dr. Barbara Wilson is at McCormick in Chicago, and really just begin to talk about what is it about what we believe that helps us to embrace ecology, and sometimes that keeps us away from it. Our reality is that we are a people who our churches in the South started in brush harbors. We are people of great agricultural norms, but we have been separated from the land in a lot of our urban environments and even in our rural cities. I am from, my family's from Oakland. We grew up in Oakland, but I always say the rest of the family is from Hollywood, Louisiana, down in the woods. And but we come out of these places and really began to turn our backs on some of the things that brought us forward. And so looking at our theology and looking at African spirituality and some of the things that we held, even as Baptist or Methodist, but there were things that were true that sometimes we knew our beliefs, but we couldn't talk about them. So beliefs about how we use medicines and herbs. There were things that we've always known that we couldn't talk about in church, but grandmother knew the medicine, right? And so it's surprising how much our theology, or this theology of escapism, really has kind of held us away from this conversation. And sometimes it comes through in preaching, but sometimes in song. Things like "This world ain't my home," right? I'm going up yonder. So really, trying to an escapism from the planet and from the woes and from the trauma, and not an embrace of, not a battle for the planet. And so some would raise the question, why are we fighting so hard to stay in this hell? And so this has been a surprising notion. And so what we do when we founded Green the Church, we wanted to really answer the question, is the Black church concerned with the ecology? Or is the Black church concerned with environmentalism and or sustainability? The answer, I believe, is yes, but we've always spoken our own language. I'm from Oakland. We were famous at a time for something called Ebonics. I like Ebonics. I believe it is empowering, right? That this notion of we talk about things in our own way. And so we may not talk about environmentalism, but to our very core, we talk about revival from week to week. We believe that anything old, decayed can become brand new again. And so we come together. This was our summit, I think, in St. Louis. We've had 7 now. We started off in Oakland. We went to Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago, North Carolina, a few other states, really being a repository to tell the story of where the Black church is in this space, and what we are doing, even though we may not be in conversation with the big greens, or we may not be in conversation with people doing food sovereignty. The Black church has always been a food hub. And so kind of how we begin to open up those doors, break down silos, reach out to other human beings that are working on the same thing. And so this is a shop. This is a couple from St. Louis that opened up a smoothie shop and began to incorporate fresh fruits and vegetables, and that they began to, kind of do this on their own, and then learn some things, how they could become even better. So we talk about, first of all, amplifying green theology to give the base, but then what are the sustainable practices? And so some of the sustainable practices are around food, which moves from food into public health, because our communities are wrecked with diabetes, hypertension, all of these things that when we came out of a place where we were eating fresh vegetables and fresh fruits, we may not have had a lot of protein, but I remember going home in the summers and Grandpapa would be growing corn and peas, and we would eat watermelon. My uncle would just reach his hand down and pull out the gut of it. You know what I mean? And we had fresh water coming out of the well, right? We did not have running water in the house, even though our neighbors were pumping oil that you could see when you turned the corner. But we were eating well and we were living better. And so we talk about that. We talk about things, Pastor Burden in St. Louis, about energy efficiency. We often say Black folk may not own a lot of skyscrapers downtown, but we own a lot of faith buildings that our grandparents have sold chicken dinners, sweet potato pies in order to pay off mortgages. And oftentimes we find ourselves crying with a loaf of bread under our arms because all of these buildings need to be retrofitted. And we ought to be a part of the building of industry that helps that to happen. I think I'm coming in on time. This is my big brother, Bruce. He's a farmer down in Louisiana. He didn't grow up in Louisiana. He grew up in Oakland. But like many others, there are individuals who are walking around these cities, I often say with their pants down, but they are farmers to the core. They just do not know it. We talk about, again, this thing of energy efficiency, not necessarily going straight and talking about solar, but how can we be more efficient? How can we be better stewards? And if we do these things at church, then we learn to do them in community at our own homes. And finally, our third arm is building power for political and economic change. How do we begin to stand for climate justice? How do we begin to march? Yes, we have to continue to talk about race. We had a conversation the other day with some clergy who are, doing social justice. And I often say we're not trying to get social justice folk on the environmental bus. We're trying to get environmental folk on the social justice bus, right? But how can we begin to use our voices and our bodies on the line for the planet and understand that the same fight for the planet is the same fight that we battle against racism and other isms. And so we are part of intersectionalities, bringing some of our faith leaders. These are some of our national presidents and things at the EPA some years ago gathering. I think this is a good piece. I'm clicking too fast. We had a great conversation a few weeks ago, bringing some of our engineers, Dr. Anthony Kinslow from Stanford, Dr. Michael Dorsey from around the corner, pastors who are doing solar, to really talk about both energy efficiency. And so these are some of the things that we are doing. I think my clicker's messing up here. And so here's how to reach us. Check out greenthechurch.org. We do things. This is, of course, Howard Thurman. I'm in the Bay Area. We love Dr. Howard Thurman, but we have online courses and things of that nature. Memberships, please check us out at www.greenthechurch.org. hit me up at ambrose@greenthechurch. Thank you all so very much. And again, glad to be here with you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Reverend Carroll. Thank you, Brother Ambrose, for that wonderful presentation. Gabby, we look forward to hearing from you now.
Well, I'm in California too. I'm not in Oakland, I'm in Sacramento. So it's morning for me. It's such an honor to be with pastors and reverends across the country. And so I am not a pastor, but I am a woman of faith. And I am the executive director for Sacramento ACT, which is part of a statewide Pico, California in Faith and Action National. But before I talk about the work that we are doing here in Sacramento, it's really important to me to kind of share how I walk into this work and the lens through which I see the world. And so I wanted to show this image. This is a picture of my grandpa, who's in the middle with the white. My grandpa has worked as an agricultural worker across the Central Valley in California since he was 16 years old. And I grew up kind of hearing stories about the horrible conditions in which he worked, the lack of water, the kind of pesticides that he was sprayed, like physically sprayed on. And I never really knew what that meant or how that would impact his health in the future or any of that. And I was raised by him. And so he is really instrumental in the way that my love and my passion for entering into this work. And the other two little boys, those are my twin boys who are 3.5. And they are the reason that I get up every day. And while I still am learning around how do we actually wrestle and address climate justice, I am committed to this fight long-term because of my children and your children and those children that are not born yet. And so, as I said, I am a woman of faith. And so I believe that one day God will ask me, you know, where's your brother? And I'm called to be my brother's keeper. And I wasn't always like, you know, super engaged around climate justice. And I must say, I had a conversion in recent times when I heard Reverend Carroll, actually, he came to Sacramento and I heard him speak. And one of the things that really moved me about hearing Reverend Carroll was that he helped me understand the very simple ways that I can contribute to this movement, but also I was able to see like how it's directly connected to my faith. And so needless to say that I really believe that our faith community are going to be instrumental for us to really address climate injustices in our local communities. And they have been doing the work. And so I just wanted to share that. At Sacramento ACT, we really do focus a lot on like our organizing model, which is this, I wanted to share because it's a very simple model. You know, we just start with having conversations with people in the community. We do some research, not in the traditional research way. We literally go out there and build relationships with people who have some sort of knowledge of what's happening in the community, what are opportunities. You know, at ACT, we don't provide any direct service. So we do strictly community organizing. And so sometimes our partners who are able to, you know, are not able to advocate in the way that we can, and research allows us to kind of get some of that information. And then we take public action, and that can look a lot of different ways. And so one of the ways in which we have been able to, a couple of years ago, 4 years ago, we had a committee of folks after actually having Reverend Carroll said, let's start a committee to address climate justice. And I said, all right, there's 10 folks ready to do this work. But then quickly found out that, I mean, they were mostly retired, right? Had some sort of area of expertise around, I mean, one of them is was a pediatrician that specialized in like pulmonology. There was a retired leader that had done a lot of water issue for the state in the past. So there was a lot of knowledge on the table. And we looked around and we're like, well, how do we like make sure that we bring the voices of people who are closest to the pain? And so we started what we called our listening campaign, and recognizing that their own congregations were very affluent, white, retired, that we were going to go knock on doors and talk to people in the community and hear what were some of the issues that were really, weighing heavy on them. And so climate change wasn't something that was at even the top 3 issues that people cared about, but they were still talking about it. I think Dr. Carroll talked about, we use our own language, right? They were still, being in California, we're experiencing a lot of more fires, more frequent fires in Sacramento. Our air quality has been really bad most of the summer. So folks were talking about it, the ways in which they contribute. When I say folks, I mean like people of color in our region. We're talking about their contributions to climate justice from more an economic perspective. So it's like, well, we carpool because we only have one car, right? And we have to drive to work, or, like it's so hot, and like they're just having conversations, but they don't even realize that they're talking about climate or climate and trying to address climate change, right? And so, one of the things that we started doing is our faith leaders made a climate emergency declaration, right? Our counties had made a declaration, but we realized quickly that as the faith community, we hadn't made a public stand on, what's our stand on caring for creation. And then we started looking at state legislation that we wanted to support and help get through. As we look into the future of where we are going is, we're starting with 10 congregations and ensuring that we start the conversation around caring for creation, and really equipping faith leaders to, one, become what is called the certified cooling congregations, which is a national recognized program by Interfaith Power and Light. And they actually get a certification for being able to reduce their carbon footprint, either like 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%. And so we're starting January, we're starting with 10 congregations doing deep listening and education, right? To be able to really help our congregations understand or learn from them what are ways in which they can save money, and at the same time, what does it look for the congregation, and also what does it look like for individuals to also, do their part to contribute to this. So thank you for having me.
Gabby, thank you so much for your presentation. I want to thank again all the panelists for fascinating and wonderful presentations. So we have some good questions in the chat, but there's a couple of questions I think would be good if each of you could answer that I think everyone listening in would want to have some sense of. And so Gabby, let's begin with you with these questions. I'll give you all both questions, and then if you would, just take a few minutes to respond. What have been some of the obstacles that you've seen in this work? Obstacles both internally in terms of religious communities, and obstacles externally to the kind of work that you want to do. That's one question. And then the second question is, what has surprised you in this work? What has surprised you in this work? So first, a question about the obstacles that you've seen and experienced, and then what has surprised you? So please, Gabby, if you would begin us.
Yes, I would say that one of the biggest obstacles has really been some of the local commitments that we've had from, elected officials. For example, some of the policies trying to pass are not attached to funding, which, make it really hard to sustain and really build what folks in the community want to do. And so that's something that we're going to have to really address. And I would say the other part that has surprised me is how hard it is to get some folks in the movement to understand, kind of it was said earlier, right, that we are trying to get folks in the environmental movement to actually get on the social justice bus versus the other way around. Because I'm in spaces where constantly, well, Gabby, how do we get more people of color to join? Well, they have other priorities, right? That we also have to kind of figure out, how do we balance and address people's immediate needs while at the same time standing for each other around the different issues. And the one thing that has inspired me is the commitment that that our community has for a better future for our children and for their communities, and the reality that they know they can build power together. It's just they don't want to be invited to the table to be to increase diversity, but they want to be co-creators and active participants of creating systems change in our region. So that inspires me.
Kyle, would you like to pick up next?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. And I apologize. I have a contractor at the house. I tried to get as far away as possible, but you still might hear some drilling. I think some challenges, the 800-pound gorilla in the room is, white evangelicals are some of the most skeptical of climate science and the most resistant to proposed solutions. Poll after poll shows that, and we're making some progress, but it remains the case that white evangelicals in particular, along with white Catholics, are still kind of at the bottom. And that is a challenge. It's a challenge that comes with the work that we do, trying to reach this community. And like I alluded to earlier, there are a whole lot of reasons for that. But that is a challenge that kind of right out of the gate, some of the very people that we're trying to reach and that are a part of our community kind of view us with suspicion right away, and we have to break down some of those barriers. I think on the flip side too, another challenge is, having environmental in our name makes us a little suspect for a lot of evangelicals. In the same way, having evangelical in our name makes us kind of suspect to a lot of the larger climate movement. So we occupy this really interesting space where in some ways we kind of have to prove ourselves to both of the communities that we're working to be a part of. I'm so grateful in my experience working in the climate movement for about 10 years now that the climate movement actually has been very welcoming, very excited about the work that we do with the community that we're trying to reach. So I've been surprised by that too. To answer that other question, I've been surprised at how open my colleagues in the movement have been and how excited they are to collaborate. I think another surprise is when we do go into congregations with the right message. Gabby and Reverend Carroll spoke about this already too so well, that our communities are talking about climate change. They just don't always know it. They're talking about things that matter to them. And so the work then is helping them understand that the things that they already care about, that they're talking about, connects to climate change. And when we do go in there and we help them understand that the things that they're energized by does connect to climate change, I've been surprised at how quickly those light bulbs go off in congregations as well as on college campuses too. When Young Evangelicals for Climate Action goes to a college campus and gives a chapel or gives a lecture or a workshop, to see how many light bulbs go off and how ready those young people are to step out and take action in their community to make a positive difference. So that's been a very pleasant surprise to see how ready so many evangelicals actually are if they hear the message framed in the right way and if the invitation is the right one.
Thank you, Kyle. Reverend Carroll.
Yeah, I think, for me, I think, that the places of resistance are around race and religion itself. Raphael Warnock, sitting senator, writes a book called The Divided Mind of the Black Church. And in it, he chronicles just kind of the difference between kind of this conservative modality that is more evangelical. That's a big part of the Black church and the Black church experience. And this notion of liberation theology, of a Black church being born, right, to battle racism, right? Born to battle enslavement, born as a social construct. And I think that those two worlds still exist. And I think that this work runs headlong into that. So at times, and again, the issue is there is social and economic stratification. So when we started this work, of course, we want to go to those who are hit first and worst by climate change. Our first summit was in West Oakland, right? A place that is, I live in West Oakland. My son has asthma. I'm right between 880 freeway and 580 and the shipyard, right? The airplanes, planes, trains, and automobiles, right? In order to get to San Francisco, where they're the Hedgeway. And so we had it there. But when we decided to have it there, the question is, well, can sisters who we talk about ecology, we talk about Black womanist theology, we talk about, the Queen Mothers, right? But in those situations, and I did it in line with the Baptist Ministers Union of Oakland and vicinity, which are not really hot on women in ministry. So, right. So the congregations who need the work, who need the support, their theology, right, does not necessarily allow it. And so then the next time we had it, we're in Chicago at Trinity United Church of Christ. It's beautiful. But then the question is, well, why does everything have to happen at the big church? Oh, you all are educated. So now we've just crossed a social economic barrier. We've just crossed of us and them, right? And again, those who are who are hit first and worst are again, to some degree, left out of the conversation. So it is that level of surprise, of shock. Oh, like these are things that keep us from getting into the work. And we haven't even opened up, right? That when you go into urban communities, even talking about the Black church, the urban community is not just the Black church. You can't go into an urban community in the Bay Area without talking about my Samoan brothers and sisters, Pacific Islanders, without our Hispanic congregations, and without the mosque. Right? You got to have something where the mosque needs something too, right? Well, we're all here together. So those are the pieces that, have really been surprising to a degree. And just recently at our conference, Reverend Dr. Frank Richardson, when we're talking about it again, we have a history of what environmentalists do and need. So we talk about people who want help conserving land, right? Conservationists, right? What does that mean when our sponsor is the Nature's Conservancy, which is the biggest owner of, quote unquote, owner of land from all around the world? Like, how are we reconciling this? And how are we talking about the need to support, and we have people whose land has been saved, not because Black people lived on the land, but because there were spotted owls. So we're not going to encroach the land because of the spotted owls. But if it was just y'all, that's all right. So these are the communities that we're trying to partner with, that automatically issues of trust, issues of being used, issues of not really being counted as full is a part of the landscape.
Yeah. Reverend Carroll, what you said is a great segue into one of the kinds of questions that's been asked by several people listening, and that is, how do you all understand yourself to be bridging the gaps between faith communities, between non-Christian and people who are against all religions but are concerned about the climate. So could you all just speak a little bit to that question about how you see yourselves bridging with these others who are also concerned, but may not share any of the kinds or live inside of different kind of faith commitments. So Gabby, let's start with you again.
Yeah, that's a great question. So at Sacramento ACT, we have 56 member congregations, of all different denominations. And so we constantly have to be bridging. And I think if there's anything that we have learned out of this pandemic is that we really truly are in this together. And our organizing model is first and foremost centered around relationships, not campaigns, right? Because campaigns have a beginning and an end, but that we are committed to, as a collective, to build what we called in the faith community, beloved community. And so, that is being intentional about building, really fully seeing each other, right? And being in agreement that I know in being able to look at our vision for where we want to see Sacramento be. How do we think about equity and all the different issue campaigns that we work on? And so I would say that bridging across difference has not been difficult. Has required intentionality, and we still have a lot of work to do because our collective of congregations is heavily Christian, right? So if we are to truly live into our aspiration to be multi-faith, we have more work to create spaces where people feel both seen and that they belong. And so I would say that we spend a lot of time in relationship building across faith traditions.
Wonderful. Kyle, please pick up.
Sure. I love that answer, Gabby. Thank you. A couple of things that come to mind for me is, one of the ways that we try to go about bridging those divides is approaching it all with humility. I think evangelicals in particular have a particular responsibility toward humility because historically, evangelical zeal for conversion and evangelism has often crossed the line into triumphalism and colonialism. And we need to recognize that. We need to name that. We need to name that we are not the only people in this space, that we have been absent from this space, actually, the climate space, for a long time. And there have been other people who have been shouldering the load for a long time that deserve our respect and our gratitude. And that we need to, in some ways, place ourselves under their leadership and learn for a while. So we need to enter into the conversation humbly and recognize that a lot of other faith traditions have been doing this for a really long time, and we might be late to the party. And that means some of how we enter into the space is to defer to their leadership and recognize that they have a lot to teach us and we have a lot to learn. The other thing is, because of the community that we work with evangelicals, there can be some suspicion around interfaith efforts. And there's lots of reasons for that too. And so how we often try to go about collaborating with other faith traditions is through a principle that we call walking together separately. So we have wonderful relationships with a whole lot of other faith organizations working in the climate space and non-faith organizations working in the climate space. A lot of respect for them. We collaborate when and where it makes sense. But when it doesn't make sense, we recognize that, it's okay for us to have different strategies, have different messaging, and to work to reach our community, because we are uniquely able to do that, just like those other organizations are uniquely able to reach their community. So we can build power together across the movement, even if, publicly it looks like we're doing separate things. If we're in communication together, if we're in relationship, if we respect each other, and that's at least my approach to how we can start to try to bridge some of those divides.
Thank you. Reverend Carroll.
Yeah, thanks. I think Gabby and Kyle have kind of hit it on the head in terms of my way of thinking. You talk about bridging gaps, and it's like I have nothing to do that with, and then I have everything to do that with. COVID hit, and as pastors, I have a clinical pastoral education background, and as pastors, sometimes the only thing you can do is be in the room. And one of the most painful experiences at COVID, one of my members was ill pretty early on, and actually succumbed to the disease, and the family was on their way. And I started putting on my clothes, and my wife looked at me. She said, "Where are you going?" And I was like, "I'm going to the hospital." And she said, "You can't." And it's the only thing that we have is to be present.
Yeah.
And so I think when it comes to bridging these gaps, and it's leaning on the power of what is divine, right? Being in rooms with people who have very different views on things, and very different religions or philosophies on life or what's right or wrong. I think the best thing that we want to do at Green the Church is to be present, as often as we can, however we can. Sometimes not even with words. Dr. Tuforiata at the ITC says sometimes talk about God, he just says, we don't even have the words, right? Just to be present, I think, and allow what is divine to take shape and to do what is divine can do, to heal and bring together and bridge those gaps.
Thank you, Reverend Carroll. Thank you all for your wisdom. There's one more question that I think would be good for each of you to just briefly give an answer. This has also been a question that many people have asked. Tell us that one important first step to take, and tell us that one first step not to take. The one thing we must not do, and the one thing we should do. Because sometimes people with the right intention would make the first wrong mistake. So tell us each briefly, what's the one thing people should do as a first step, and what's one thing that they should not do as a first step? So Gabby, let's start with you.
Oh my God, that's a great question. What not to do? Well, I would say, as I mentioned earlier, definitely don't invite people into a space. I mean, especially if you're trying to diversify the table that has already been set, right? Let's be humble enough to know that it's okay if you don't have the most diverse table right now, but to engage the thinking of those folks that are in the community, that are trusted messengers, in terms about what would help set the table that would allow a space of belonging for other folks. Sometimes it's hard to come to a table where you're talking so wonky, even for me, right? I remember coming into when we first started the committee, and I'm like, carbon footprint, what? Green, what? I mean, and I think of myself being pretty smart, but it was really being able to create a space that really allows people to feel included, checking in with them after the meeting. If you realize this was a wonky meeting, but we had to get through it, just follow up with people when people come. I think that one of the things I have realized in this work is that people want to get involved. They care deeply about their community. They want to live in healthy, thriving communities. They just don't know how. And once they already have taken the step to come through the door, then just as Reverend Carroll said, walk with them, right? And then they take off. Then they start chairing meetings and coming to different things. So I would say I want to encourage people to do that. If you leave tables, constantly ask people, what do they need to be fully present? Could be childcare. It could be the meeting being at a different time. Very simple things. And if you want to just get engaged, I know that a lot of our climate justice committee, although we work with different congregations, we have a lot of folks that are not associated with an institution, right? So it is really about being clear about your purpose. And once you're clear about your purpose, you will find the right people in the community that you feel like this is my people, and I'm going to throw down with them. So I just want to keep on knocking on doors, because if you are moved in your heart to take action, whether that is sending an email, whether that is donating to an organization. Take action. Don't sit on it. I think that in my faith tradition, that is like, the Holy Spirit really moving you to do something.
Thank you, Director Trejo. Thank you. Kyle, please.
Yeah, Yale Program on Climate Change Communications own research tells us that we're experiencing a spiral of climate science, or a spiral of silence around the climate issue right now. Nobody's talking about it. And so one of the first things I tell people to do right away is just talk about it more. So the first step you can take, make a list of one person, one person for whom you're a trusted messenger that needs to hear about why you care about climate change, and have that conversation with them. And then make a list of one person for whom you are not a trusted messenger, and then don't have a conversation with that person. move the people you can move, and trust others to move the people they can move. And if we're all doing that together, we'll get there. We'll win.
Thank you.
That's good.
Reverend Carroll, please.
I don't think I can add much more. I'll just lift a quote I read that Robert Fulghum quoted when he left a monastery or something like that. It says, "In life, there's nothing you must do, nothing you must be, and nothing you must become. However, it's good to know that fire burns, and when it rains, the earth gets wet."
That's great. That's great. Again, thank you, panelists, for sharing your wisdom and your insight. It's been a wonderful time. So I'm going to now turn it back over to Tom Murray, who will say a few words for us. Tom?
Yes, hi, Professor Jennings. Thank you so much. That was a phenomenal last question. I'd like to thank you all, to our panelists. It's been a very inspiring talk today. I'd also like to extend a thank you to all of our attendees. So it's just about 1 p.m. right now, so I think we're going to start wrapping up. But if you registered for today's talk, you should be receiving an email after this with a recording of today's talk. Feel free to share it to anyone who wasn't able to make it today, or if you're interested in rewatching it. I know also our panelists have very graciously said that we can share their emails with everyone. I know there's a lot of questions in the Q&A. Sadly, we can't get to them all. So please feel free to reach out to any of them if you have any specific questions. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Pastor, and thank you, Elisa Fernandez, for your wonderful work as well.